Howdy, we are finishing off now with part 5 of chapter 7. So when things don't go well, there are a few things that firms can do. One of them is related to restructuring. A strategy, which is a strategy through which a firm changes its set of businesses or its financial structure. The failure of an acquisition strategy often precedes a restructuring strategy, but not always. Sometimes firms have to restructure for other reasons. Restructuring may also occur because of changes in the external or internal environments, and this restructuring may actually be the way that firms adapt to these changes. So restructuring strategies can include downsizing, downscoping, and leveraged buyouts. With downsizing, this is a reduction in the number of a firm's employees and sometimes in the number of its operating units. This may or may not change the composition of businesses in the firm's portfolio, but the reasons for doing this are the expectation of improved profitability related to cost reductions, and perhaps a desire or necessity for more efficient operations. Next, we have downscoping. So this would be a divestiture or a spin-off or other means of eliminating businesses that are unrelated to a firm's core businesses. When I was working at Micron Technology, we had a company called Aptina. Well, it was a product line really, making image sensors, even though we were primarily a computer memory company. Micron decided that the image sensor business should be spun off. So they created a company called Aptina, they spun it off, and it was no longer a core part of the business. This divestiture allowed the company to refocus, allowed Micron to refocus on what it needed to spend its efforts on. So allows a firm to strategically refocus. This may be accompanied by downsizing, but not necessarily, and it results in a smaller firm that can be more effectively managed by the top management team. Next, we have leveraged buyouts. This is a strategy where some outside group buys all of a firm's assets in order to take the firm private. Significant debt may be incurred to finance the buyout, and it may be followed by an immediate sale of non-core assets to pare down that debt. This can correct for managerial mistakes if a CEO is doing a very poor job of running a company to the point that an outside party can come in and buy up enough stock to take control. Those managers can ultimately lose their jobs, and this can lead to the leveraged buyout can be the way by which the market fixes that problem. And this can also facilitate entrepreneurial efforts and strategic growth. So I want to give you an example of a number of companies where there were a number of acquisitions, divestitures, and restructuring that happened. So Keds was founded in 1916 by US Rubber Company, forming by consolidating 30 different shoe brand names. They created sneakers, which were quiet shoes with rubber soles where you could sneak around and not make a lot of sound. A few years, about 20 years later, Paul Sperry, an inventor and an avid sailor, came up with a new type of a boat shoe, a shoe that you could walk on a wet deck of a boat without slipping. He actually got the idea from looking at the bottom of his dog's feet because he realized that the dog didn't slip around all the time. Sperry made a boat shoe that was so good that it was picked up by the US Navy a few years later for its design and performance. And just a year later, Sperry sold his company to the US Rubber Company. And then in 1979, both Sperry and Keds were acquired by the Stride-Rite Corporation from the US Rubber Company. So now Stride-Rite owns Sperry Topsider and Keds. A number of years later, Stride-Rite purchased Saucony. You'll see a lot of these different acquisitions, but then you actually see the spin-off, the divestiture or the restructuring from US Rubber Company, but then you see more acquisitions coming into the Stride-Rite portfolio. And this was followed by Stride-Rite being acquired by Payless ShoeSource for about $800 million in cash. So this turned out to not actually have been the best idea There were a number of issues related to a lack of synergies. The different shoes had completely different markets, business strategies, supply chains. There was no synergy to be had here. So Payless and Keds, which was really Keds, Stride Right, Saucony, and Sperry were all sold off to a different company. So Blum Capital Partners and Golden Gate Capital purchased Payless, while Wolverine Worldwide took the other brands that fit their portfolio better. So the company was split, the company, the CEO lost his job, and ultimately that acquisition where Payless bought Stride Right and the other companies, the other brands, turned out to not be a good decision. So this is just an example of how this can lead to growth and development, but also how it can go poorly. So with the problems with acquisitions that we discussed before, Payless had integration difficulties. They didn't do a very good job of pulling everything together. Financial systems, corporate cultures, headquarters were in different states. It just didn't come together well. There was too much debt. You'll actually see that $800 million deal financed with debt. You see the debt to asset ratio there jumped from 50 to 70%. And it led to a lack of flexibility that Payless had. And they were ultimately unable to achieve any kind of synergy. And this led to the failure of this deal and ultimately to that restructuring that happened. So for question number 5, I want you to find 2 examples of firms restructuring in recent years.